In the aftermath of World War I, Poland was reborn after suffering under the heavy yokes of Germany, Russia, and to a lesser degree Austria. Despite securing their freedom after further wars against their neighbors, a myriad of issues troubled the young nation. Their economy struggled under the weight of post-war reconstruction, crippled by hyperinflation in the early 1920s and an over-reliance on agriculture. Industrial growth was primarily in the former German West, so unemployment was high across the nation, especially in the rural East, as millions of surplus laborers were unable to find work. The Sejm, Poland's parliament, was a battleground of factionalism, with parties like National Democracy and the Polish Socialist Party unable to form lasting coalitions, resulting in 14 different cabinets between 1918 and 1926. Not dissimilar from the rest of Europe, political violence was rampant. Even their president, Gabriel Narutowicz, was assassinated in 1922. Poland's ethnic diversity proved worrisome, as populations of Ukrainians, Belarusians, Germans, and Jews were present, but none of them were large enough to command a real political presence, leading to some governments enacting Polonization efforts. So, greetings, you over 65,000 Polish patriots, and the 80% who haven't subscribed yet, as we delve into the complex web of interwar Polish-German relations. Frustrated by the chaos destroying his home, Marshal Józef Piłsudski, the hero of the Polish-Soviet War, seized power in a military coup in May 1926. Unlike the totalitarian regimes of Mussolini or Hitler, Piłsudski did not work to dismantle the Sejm or suspend the constitution entirely. Instead, he established the Sanacja regime, dissolved from sanatio, the Latin word for healing, aiming to purge corruption and inefficiency. His non-party bloc for cooperation with the government dominated the 1928 and 1930 elections, as some of their opposition, mainly subversive communists, were stifled. Not officially a dictator, Piłsudski turned down the presidency, becoming the Minister of Military Affairs and General Inspector of the Armed Forces, essentially their commander-in-chief. He ruled indirectly, though, through a cadre of loyal military officers known as the colonels. Despite refusing the office, the presidency was strengthened under his loyal ally, Ignacy Mociski, at the Sejm's expense. Wedged between a rock and a hard place with Russia and Germany, Piłsudski pursued neutrality, believing the ideological clash between Bolshevism and Nazism would prevent their alliance, securing the Polish-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact of 1932. Nonetheless, having been born under Russian-occupied Poland and leading Poland to victory over the communists, he was more anti-Russian, while not viewing Germany with the same existential dread. However, the following year, Adolf Hitler was elected the German Chancellor, so alarm bells went off in Poland. This man could not be allowed to stay in power, with his promises to reclaim German territory stripped in the Treaty of Versailles, clamoring for Lebensraum. Quote, "And so we, National Socialists, consciously draw a line beneath the foreign policy tendency of our pre-war period. We take up where we broke off 600 years ago. We stop the endless German movement to the south and west, and we turn our gaze to the land in the east." Unquote. Piłsudski even considered a preemptive strike against Germany when its military was still weak and rearmament had not yet begun. Poland's army, hardened by numerous wars, was a formidable force in comparison. The Marshal sought support from France, Poland's ally since 1921. Would France order the mobilization of her armed forces if Germany attacked Poland? And in the case of such German aggression towards Poland, would France move her armed forces towards the German border? A few days later, Paul Boncourt, France's foreign minister, gave the French government's answer to Piłsudski's questions. No to both. France could only promise to aid Poland in the form of staff, armaments, and ammunition. Piłsudski had no other option than to conclude the Polish-French alliance contained, in practice, no military guarantee of Poland's borders. Realizing the French would not even defend Poland, Piłsudski abandoned the plan, signing the Polish-German Non-Aggression Pact of 1934, theoretically securing Poland's borders. The following year, the Germans proposed an alliance with Poland against the Soviets, offering all of Ukraine to Warsaw after a theoretical victory over the Muscovites. but Piłsudski firmly rejected the offer, believing Poland's role was to act as a steadying element for the peace and equilibrium of Europe. That same year, on May 12th, Piłsudski died. Hitler, who had deeply respected Piłsudski, praised him during his Reichstag speech on May 21st. Quote, "My honorable deputies, I beseech you to rise from your seats and remember with me a great man who had been called to his maker a few days ago. The German people, and with it especially the German Reichstag, as an authoritative representative of the German people, stands in deep sympathy at the grave of the Grand Marshal of the now friendly Polish nation. I think I can also say that we understand very particularly what a great loss has befallen the people of Poland. While we recognize the magnitude of the Marshal, we also know that he was one of those men who energetically advocated everywhere for peace and who considered as a visible fact of such peace to bring about the Polish-German understanding. Thank you for having raised from your seats in honor of the late Polish Marshal Piłsudski." The Führer even held a special memorial service for the Marshal in Berlin, with it being the last time he entered a Catholic church. Without her head, the Sanacja regime fractured into three factions. The Colonels, led by Prime Minister Valery Sławik, the Castle, centered around President Ignacy Mościcki, and the Marshals, rallying around Inspector General Edward Rittschmiegel. After much infighting, Mościcki and Rittschmiegel cut a deal, forcing Sławik out. Though there was still a tangible divide between the Castle and the Marshals. Rittschmiegel was eventually awarded the title of second man in the state after the president, and given the rank of Marshal of Poland, with propaganda portraying him as Piłsudski's appointed successor, though many Piłsudskiites formed into other camps. Foreign Minister Józef Beck, appointed by Piłsudski, effectively remained outside of the domestic purview, free to pursue a scaled-down version of Piłsudski's Międzymorze, rebranded as a Third Europe, to counter Germany and the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, trying to get Hungary and Romania to ally was like combining oil and water, and since the Germans had the second largest global economy and the third biggest population in Europe, Budapest and Bucharest were more inclined to follow Berlin. Meanwhile, Hitler followed through on his aims, trampling over Versailles. In March 1936, the Rhineland was remilitarized as the Wehrmacht marched in unopposed. Hitler's bet on British and French docility proved wise. In March 1938, after the failed Nazi coup of 1934 that had killed former Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss, Austria became the first victim of Hitler's expansion when German troops marched in to block the Austrian government's planned plebiscite, one that the Gestapo reports indicate would have seen the Anschluss thoroughly lose, and the country was annexed as part of the Reich. Now encircled, Czechoslovakia was in a precarious position as Germany funded ethnic German separatists in the Sudeten German Party to precipitate the Sudetenland crisis in that fall. Hitler soon demanded the cession of the Sudetenland, claiming Prague was mistreating the Germans. At the Munich conference in September, Britain and France folded to the German demands, appeasing Hitler to avoid war. Surprisingly Machiavellian, Poland capitalized on the chaos, issuing an ultimatum to Czechoslovakia, annexing Zwolle, a small industrial area with a Polish minority that the two had fought over in 1919, satiating nationalists, but further isolating herself from the rest of Europe. Germany continued to entice Poland into their Anti-Comintern Pact, with talks ramping up after they'd strengthened their hand with their recent expansions. Quote, "There was no plan at this stage for invasion and conquest. The aim, soon proving illusory, was to bind Poland to Germany against Russia, thereby also blocking any possibility of an alliance with the French. At the same time, the intention was to reach agreement over Danzig and the corridor. Already by late October, Ribbentrop was proposing to settle all differences between Germany and Poland by an agreement for the return of Danzig, together with railway and road passage through the corridor. Not in and of itself a novel idea, in return for a free port for Poland in Danzig and an extension of the non-aggression treaty to 25 years with a joint guarantee of frontiers." Unquote. Although it doesn't sound that bad on paper, as historian Gerard Weinberg put it, quote, "This was Germany's insistence on Poland becoming a vassal of Germany. That was to be politically acknowledged by adherents to the Anti-Comintern Pact." Unquote. Hitler believed Poland was on the brink of joining, even praising Poland as late as January 1939. Quote, "These days bear witness to the 5th anniversary of the conclusion of our non-aggression pact with Poland. there is little dissent today amongst those who truly love peace as to the value of this agreement. Just imagine where the developments might have taken Europe in the interim had it not been for the conclusion of this pact, which truly signaled a great relief for all involved. Poland's most outstanding marshal and patriot rendered his people as a great service as the National Socialist State's leadership rendered the German Volk. And, in the course of the tense months last year, German-Polish friendship became a reassuring factor in the otherwise troubled political life in Europe." Unquote. However, Poland still absolutely refused to join the Germans, and their position was greatly reduced by March 16th, when Germany and Hungary carved up the remains of Czechoslovakia, now leaving Poland's crucial central industrial region, or heavy industrial center strategically placed away from Russia or Germany, vulnerable to the newborn German puppet regime in Slovakia. Believing their position was now strong enough, Ribbentrop told Beck on March 21st, quote, "The return of Danzig to the Reich, extraterritorial rail and road connections between East Prussia and the Reich, and, in return, a German guarantee for the corridor. I could well imagine that in such circumstances it would be possible to deal with a Slovak question to the satisfaction of all." Unquote. He later laid it out in even clearer terms. Quote, "Poland must realize clearly that she could not take a middle course. Either Poland would remain a national state working for a reasonable relationship with Germany and her Führer, or one day there would arise a Marxist Polish government which would then be absorbed by Bolshevist Russia." Unquote. To further pressure the Poles, Germany issued an ultimatum to Lithuania, annexing Memeland, signing a pact to prevent Lithuanian rapprochement with Poland, leaving Poland without any potential allies. The Polish government's internal memos spelled it out plainly. Quote, "Obviously, the German government knew that acceptance of these demands would give Germany the economic and strategic control of Poland's access to the sea, and that the situation thus created would have soon compelled Poland to subordinate her policy to that of Germany and to become an ally of Germany first in her action against the Soviets, and later doubtless against Western Europe." Unquote. Effectively encircled by the Nazis, Poland had no choice but to look west, finally securing guarantees from France and Britain in the case of German aggression. But this only further angered Hitler, who began preparations for war as anti-Polish rhetoric ramped up. On August 23rd, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was secretly signed between Germany and the Soviets, planning a division of Eastern Europe. Finally, on September 1st, Germany invaded, followed by the Bolsheviks on September 17th, rapidly destroying Poland as Warsaw fell by the 28th. Today, things were different, and Poland elected to forge an alternate path, one of blood and iron. By the end of 38, with Germany looking quite menacing, Poland again asked the West for security guarantees here, only to be rebuffed once more, so they decided to cut a deal with the devil. Keep in mind, to the Poles, these were not the Nazis as we think of them. They were just another face for the Germans. Ribbentrop met to resolve the corridor and Danzig with Beck, who was hoping to buy time so Sanacja could utilize Poland's World War I strategy, cooperate with Germany against Russia in lieu of a future pivot to the West. In January 1939, talks between Beck and Ribbentrop progressed positively, as Hitler wanted Polish and Hungarian aid in the final partition of Czechoslovakia. They were soon joined by István Csaki, the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, settling the matter. On March 15, 1939, Germany, Poland, and Hungary invaded what remained of Czechoslovakia. The Germans established their protectorate of Bohemia-Moravia, Poland took Moravska Ostrava, an important area for its industry and minerals, as well as Spiš, historically part of the Commonwealth, while Hungary took Slovakia and Ruthenia, both within the Kingdom of Hungary just 20 years earlier, quelling any Ukrainian agitation for Poland and strengthening Poland's southern flank, securing the central industrial region in the case of German subterfuge. Quickly thereafter, Poland and Germany joined the Anti-Comintern Pact, resolving the corridor on Danzig. Germany built an extraterritorial highway and railway linking Pomerania to East Prussia, whilst Danzig was partitioned, with the German majority city annexed to East Prussia and the Polish majority rural areas integrated into Poland, enabling a secure railway and canal for Poland to Gdynia, Poland's vital Baltic port. In return, Hitler guaranteed Poland's western borders and economic rights in Danzig, extending the non-aggression treaty to 25 years, hopefully ending the dispute. Germany also restrained her Baltic ambitions, avoiding the annexation of Memeland from Lithuania to prevent antagonization of the Poles, who had her own designs for her rebellious younger brother. Historically, Hitler restrained the Memel Germans until Poland's rebuke, so with their alliance, it was not dissimilar for his historical decision to limit agitation amongst the ethnic Germans in Denmark. Additionally, the Führer feared any move in Memel would precipitate an outright Polish annexation of Lithuania, something that might strengthen them a bit too much as they no longer would be reliant on Germany for sea access. Now, the tricky question. What's next for Germany? Internal German memos from early 1939 still had Hitler preparing for war no earlier than 1943, one that would be against the West, which we all know wasn't the case. Germany needed a war to avoid the beginning of an economic debt spiral due to inflation caused by the remilitarization, something their Ministry of Economics concluded would be written off on the defeated powers. So it was either war now or bankruptcy. Thus, despite the preparations for the war in the West, historian Ian Kershaw pointed out an obvious issue. Long-term military preparations were directed towards eventual confrontation with the West, but it was well recognized that the armed forces were years away from being ready for any conflict with Britain and France. Unquote. When taking this in account of the Polish memos quoted earlier that indicate Germany may have been looking for a war in 1939 against Russia, that appears the far likelier outcome here. On top of that, Germany had constantly broached this subject. Quote, the Chancellor pointed out that in regard to Poland, he has always and invariably tried to follow the policy initiated by the Declaration of 1934. In his opinion, the community of interest between Germany and Poland, so far as Russia was concerned, was complete. For the Reich, Russia, whether Tsarist or Bolshevist, was equally dangerous. The latter was perhaps a greater danger because of the communist propaganda, but the former was far more dangerous in the military and even more in the imperialistic sense. For these reasons, a strong Poland was absolutely a necessity for Germany. At this point, the Chancellor remarked that every Polish division engaged against Russia was a corresponding saving a German division. The Chancellor further declared that he was interested in the Ukraine from the economic viewpoint, but he had no interest in it politically. Unquote. It was also made clear to Ribbentrop that Poland still maintained claims over Ukraine at this point historically. Quote, Mr. Back made no secret of the fact that Poland had aspirations directed towards the Soviet Ukraine and a connection with the Black Sea, unquote. And later, quote, I asked Beck whether they had given up on Marshal Piłsudski's aspirations in this direction, that is, towards Ukraine. He answered me laughingly that they had even been in Kiev, and that these aspirations were doubtless still alive today, unquote. Thus, war with Russia was on. Preparations quickly began between Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Romania, pressured by their fascist party, for war. Finally, in May, news broke out across Poland. The Soviets were invading. In reality, Poland had organized a false flag attack, giving them a casus belli as propaganda immediately kicked in, proclaiming a crusade to crush Bolshevism. The timing here was far more favorable for the invaders. In 1939, the Red Army was crippled by Stalin's purges, with most of their high command imprisoned or executed. They still had mostly outdated equipment, so BTs, T-26s, and I-16s, instead of the T-34s and KVs. Plus, the starting line was much further to the east, as the Soviets didn't control the Baltics, Kresy, or Bessarabia, all of which still had perfectly functioning supply lines for the invaders to use. On top of that, there were far fewer Soviet defensive belts, and their industry had not yet been moved east across the Urals. Additionally, the Germans were in a much stronger position, with their entire military involved here, no longer divided guarding the western flank, secured, for now, by the Anglo-German peace agreement. Plus, with the Polish army fielding over 1 million men herself, the total Axis force would be close to 8 million strong, far surpassing the historical 3.8 million. Another factor to consider is the local support would be greatly increased here, as pushing Poland as a liberator from the Russians is a much more palatable thing for the Ukrainians and Belarusians than Germany taking that role. So, when they finally invaded in May, at the same time as the Japanese were fighting the Soviets in Siberia, instead of taking 4 months to reach Moscow, The closer starting point, better logistical conditions, and far weaker Russia enabled them to reach Moscow in 3 months by August, capturing the city before winter set in. At the same time, alliances were struck with the Finns, who moved into Karelia and the Kola, as other major Russian cities like Leningrad and Stalingrad fell in the Blitzkrieg, leading to the total Soviet collapse by the year's end. The final division of the Soviet Union is nigh impossible to predict here, as there's really nothing to base this on, but this is my best guess. Poland elected to outright annex Ukraine and Belarus, seeing them as more people to continue their Polonization policies, and because it would be more militarily advantageous rather than just have them as mere puppets, while Germany established various Reichskommissariats for Lebensraum, officially outside of the Reich but controlled by German governors. In the wake of the Soviet Union's collapse, Europe was in an extremely dark position. Britain and France had used the time wisely, building up their military strength for the obvious war to come, with completion of the Maginot Line to the Channel, but things were bleak. They were flooded with news of horrific atrocities occurring in the East, with ethnic cleansing pogroms breaking out, millions essentially reduced to German slaves in forced labor camps. Behind the scenes, tension simmered between Poland and Germany, who began exerting more pressure on Poland's internal governance, causing Beck to reopen diplomatic channels with the West. But many in Warsaw were elated at the fruits of the German alliance. Would the cursed alliance of Poland and Germany be able to subsist? Or would the Poles betray the Teutons in the upcoming war? Or were they already too far gone to even turn away from Germany? Comment your thoughts below. If you appreciate my work, please subscribe and consider supporting me on Patreon to get ad-free viewing, maps, and more. These videos are only possible thanks to my patrons' generous support. Click here to watch another amazing video. Thanks for sticking around at the end. I will see you soon. Goodbye.